TV viewers, and welcome to a new edition from our program Body and Soul. In today's edition, we are going to talk about a major problem for many families in the world, which is the teenagers. What are the main problems that the teenagers are facing and why they are causing problems to their parents? To know more about these facts and to know more about the teenagers and how to deal with our kids in this very critical stage of their lives, we are very much delighted to have our dear guest, Dr. Samah Khamis, the life coach. Hello, Dr. Samah, and thank you very much for being with us.
Welcome.
Of course, the teenagers are a real headache for the parents. When, to begin with, do I know that my boy or girl is now a teenager?
There are physical signs and there are emotional signs to actually tell us that my son or daughter has reached puberty or teenage. For example, as we all know, there would be changes in maybe the hair, skin for the boys, or maybe even the voice, the intonation of the voice. The girl also will have some changes physically in her body, and all that would indicate that they have started puberty when it comes to the physical part. As for the emotional, there are also signs, like for example, that person will tend to acquire more kind of individuality. He would like to feel that he is no more a person to be guided and told to and educated all the time and preached all the time. He'd like to have separate identity, sort of. So that is also an indicator that that son or daughter has now reached a point of puberty.
How different are boys from girls during that stage?
The girls, they tend to be more emotional. They would resort to their friends whenever they need some kind of, to talk about a certain issue, or when they're going through a certain emotional stress. You find that the girls, they tend to talk to their peers, whereas boys, they have a psychological tendency to either fight or flight. So it's either that they would address a certain issue.
So the boys here, do you mean, Dr. Samah, they are getting more aggressive?
Yes, in a way. In a way, they are. You would tend to get more aggressive as they go into the teenage, mistakenly thinking that this is a show of independence and a show of self-awareness or identity.
And the girl?
The girls, they tend to be more emotional. They are more affectionate. They would tend to have more of their friends around them whenever they need them. They will tend to maybe draw or write or express themselves in different ways. But the boys, they have this, as I said, this flight or flight, meaning that they either confront the person aggressively or they just tend to ignore the issue altogether.
The major phenomenon of the teenage stage is the girl or boy are trying to have their own identity. To say that we are old enough now to know what's right and wrong for us, and we are free, we want to do whatever we want. So why is this identity issue a problem, and how the parents should deal with that?
Parents will be an important and major role in this phase. So they need to know more about adolescence. They need to know more about teenage. Teenage should not be seen as a threat. It should not be seen as something that is like a war phase that I'm going through with my son. Rather, we should understand more about this phase in their lives, and we have to address them differently from the way we used to before. So let me just take you a little bit backward. Before teenage, that is the time when I established lots of things before the teenage time. So prior to teenage, I have to establish certain fundamentals in my family. The kids, they need to know how exactly do I deal with them. They need to know what grounds do they have, what values do I acquire, how to evaluate certain matters. So these issues have to be resolved before teenage starts. Once teenage is there, then my technique and my ways of dealing with my children should be different. I should not authoritarian kind of parent or the person to address my son or daughter in orders all the time and issuing them, certain rules to follow, because that would be actually very provocative to my kids and would never end peacefully, So rather than do that, I need to open up my heart and give them more time to express themselves.
First, we'll go towards this report about the needs of the teenagers, and after that, we'll be back to continue our interview with Dr. Samah.
Raising teens can be stressful. Psychologists say teenagers have a number of basic needs which need to be fulfilled during adolescence in order to become healthy, well-adjusted adults. The All Pro Dad internet site lists them as 1. Develop their distinct identity and a sense of their uniqueness. As parents, we can have a tremendous influence on their identity or self-esteem. Identity means the way a teen feels about himself, positive or negative. 2. Progressively separate themselves from their childhood dependency on their parents. A mentor needs to be involved at this stage because outside instruction can make a special impact on their lives. 3. Develop meaningful relationships with peers and others outside the family. Teenagers enjoy spending exceedingly more time away from home than they did at younger ages, but they still need the emotions they have with their families. 4. Gain the confidence and skills to prepare for a career, economic independence, and other adult responsibilities. The more skills a teenager acquires, for example, how to cook, change the oil, fix something broken, or build something, the better he or she will feel about him or herself. 5. Spiritual needs and basic attitude toward life. Faith and spirituality are definitely evident at this stage of life and helps a lot in supporting morals and passing safely through such a sensitive stage of life. Well, at such a stage, teens might go a whole day without seeking our help. But as Dr. Ross Campbell complains in his book, How to Really Love Your Teenager, teens have something like a container built within them, and every once in a while they run out of emotional gas. This is when they come up and need to be close to parents. They need touching, listening, understanding, and time.
And welcome back, our dear viewers. We continue our interviews with Dr. Samah Khamis about the teenagers. Dr. Samah, how can the parents help their teenager kids in the identity process and the identity problem?
They need to actually talk to them. So teenagers, they need two things. They need to talk and they need to be heard, which is not actually the case. More often, parents tend to issue orders rather than talk. So during that time, talking, giving time to the teenager, actively listen to them is very, very important. Something else is we need to discuss everything that has related to that phase openly. So why not give them a chance to read about it more? Why not give them a chance to analyze what they're going through? Instead of issuing certain, like we identify the situation, like when I say, for instance, I don't like what you're wearing, instead of saying that, you can tell her or ask your daughter, for instance, do you think that this is suitable to you're going with? Exactly. So give questions instead of giving statements. That is also another way of doing it.
But would that be acceptable from the teenagers to receive? Because most of the time we found that they tend to fight with their parents, especially their parents, if they are giving them any instructions or giving them any remarks, as you have kindly mentioned also about how they dress, how they talk over the phone, how they are looking most of the time on the phone or on the internet or whatsoever. So to what extent they are accepting these advices from the parents?
It is true that during that time you find some kind of rejection to all sorts of advice or remarks or whatever. So when I understand the form of phase that they're going through, that this is the nature of teenage in a way, then as a parent I will not feel threatened by that. Be accepting it, I wouldn't be answering back in kind of aggression.
But that could lead to more negative repercussions, which could lead to more characteristic problem for the kids.
Yes, it depends on how I'm handling this. So the more I feel that we are in a war zone and I have to get my my voice heard and my rule being accomplished or applied, then definitely we'll be going through certain phases of conflict and struggle. But instead of doing that, I can actually, I have to pass a remark. If I see something wrong, I still have to say it, whether or not my teenage will actually listen to me. You may think that he's not listening, but actually he's absorbing all that in his system, and that will actually be reflected later on in his life.
Yes.
So the way he will handle or treat his will actually be impacted by the way I have treated my child. So I should not stop giving remarks, but the point is how to give these remarks. So instead of complaining, instead of actually criticizing, I should be asking questions like, how do you think about that? Or why did you do this? And so on. So I get the teenager time to reevaluate his attitude and his behavior rather than passing judgments to him.
What are the best way to deal with a teenage kid? Through being aggressive, through being understanding, through being firm, through being lenient? What are the major characteristics that I should take as a parent, or the attitude that I should adopt as a parent to deal with my teenage kids?
That's a very important question. Usually parents are divided into three categories, either authoritarian parent or submissive parent or an assertive parent. So the authoritarian parent, he is the one who has certain view about how life should be led and how his child should be treated or behave. And he has certain laws and rules that he thinks should be followed, and there's no other way other than his rules. That is the authoritarian kind of parent. And the other type, which is completely the opposite, and that's a submissive parent. He doesn't have a certain clarity of what foundations he needs to establish. He doesn't know what kind of values he should stick to. And it keeps changing as time passes. And he thinks that this is flexibility, and actually it's not. And that is the second type. The third type is the assertive kind of parent who knows his values, he knows the limits, he knows the laws that he should be abided by, yet he has this kind of margin of flexibility that would enable the teenager to actually express himself and be heard. So there are those three types are usually the ones that parents adopt. So for example, the first type, which is the authoritarian, once you deal with your teenage from that kind of treatment, you will end up with stop conflict, and it will be
maybe it would lead to negative emotions from both sides,
and suppressions, and the teenager would feel oppressed, and he would feel that there is some kind of animosity between him and the parent, and it will only escalate. As for the submissive, the parent may think that he's doing what the teenager is just wanting, and therefore they will live in peace. And that could be true on the surface, but deep inside, what happens with a submissive parent is that the teenager would lose respect. Because whenever he's asking for something, it is granted. Whenever I need something, it is done. So there are no solid grounds in the family, and that would make me feel unsafe, insecure, and definitely I will not respect the parent.
To what extent the teenager would accept advices from the, not the parents, but from others? Like if he goes to a life coach, from teachers, from family members, more than the parents themselves. So how do you see that?
That's very true. Teenagers tend to listen more to people who are out of the authority zone. So as long as you are representing an authority, then unfortunately the teenager would tend to reject that person. So not only the parent, also the teacher. If the teacher is actually dealing with the student in a type of a yes-no kind of treatment, or a teacher who is always, again, sending certain messages that is full of, negativity, controlling the student's behavior, then again, the student will tend to reject that. So, but it is proven that teenagers would tend to listen more and be more reactive with whoever is away from the circle of authority, like maybe their aunts, their uncles, their friends, definitely. Anyone other than the direct authority would be heard more often by the teenager.
Dr. Samah, to what extent during that period of our kids' lives influenced by the friends and peers?
Major influence, of course, a major influence.
The life itself.
Exactly, because the life is actually tending to be in two major circles. So we have the family circle and we have the peer circle. So the family circle will be seen by the teenager as the symbol of authority, which needs to be defied. Whereas the other circle, which is the circle of friends, they tend to think of this as it's a part of them. It is where they find their identity. It is where they find that they are not being judged they're being accepted, they're being cared for. So they tend to indulge themselves more with their peers than with their parents, definitely. And that makes this circle of great importance in their lives. So we need to keep an eye on our kids when it
How can we do that, Dr. Samah, as a life coach nowadays, and maybe you are facing some of these problems because of all the technological things. We are always on the internet. We are always chatting on the different applications on the mobile phones. And it's totally out of control. Every single person now, every kid, not only teenagers, are having their own smartphones. So how can you control what they are doing with all the new applications through what they're chatting? So
it is very difficult.
Facebook
it is almost impossible to control that. Not anymore.
During the old times with the landlines, it was controllable.
Exactly. Nowadays it is not. Of course it is not. Therefore, the major importance now lies on establishing the value system. So we need to establish a value system in the kid prior to the teenage phase. So before he reaches teenage, I should have at least made him feel that we are on solid grounds. We know exactly our value system. Is this family, for instance, abiding by the religious trend, or is it a secular kind of family? What kind of values do I adopt? These things have to be very clear prior to teenage. So when the child reaches teenage, he will then at least have what we call selectiveness. He knows how to select his friends. He knows how to, in a way, hopefully. And also
because still the teenage time is not that old to be wise enough in order to have good evaluation for the person in front of me. So it's quite scary.
So there are two major tools to be used by the parent at this phase. The first one is, as I said, establishing a value system that would enable him to select. And the second thing is establishing some kind of communication between me and my kids. So if the more the communication is open, the more you see the teenage resorting to his parents and discussing things with them, and therefore I would feel more secure. I'll feel that, okay, even if that teenager would fall into a certain mistake or whatever, he'll come back to me as a parent that he trusts, and he will talk to me, and that is very important. If the parent does not feel that he's playing this role, then a life coach is a must at this point. I mean, he needs to find somebody else other than himself to address certain issues with a teenager.
What about the mood swings? Of course, the teenagers are always linked to mood swings. So why this feature is related to the teenagers, and how can we overcome that or deal with that?
Mood swings, they have two factors. First one is the physical. We're talking here about hormones, for instance, and we're also talking about the emotional, because the identity hasn't been established yet. So one day he'll see himself as a victim, and he feels sorry for himself, and therefore he goes into depression. Another day he feels that he's an accomplisher, he has accomplished certain things, and that he's proud of himself, and so the level of assertiveness rises. So they have those two factors playing a very important role, and that is the physical, which is the hormones, and the emotional, until he establishes a solid self-identity.
Dr. Samah, also during the teenagers' time, we find that our kids are having weird demands, like they are wearing strange clothing, they are having different and weird haircuts, they are doing some weird stuff. So how the parent should deal with that behavior?
It depends on the family. If the family is so strict and authoritarian, then definitely it will not leave any room for the kid to do so, and oppression would actually be the outcome. Other families would open the room, and therefore we can actually sit and talk about, for example, the haircut that he wants to have. We would refer to the value system that was established, that should have been established before the teenage, and that is why this value system is very important. We should agree on certain criteria to abide by. So the parent at this point needs to discuss things with the teenager. He cannot just implore certain things, because if I now implore him not to do this haircut at that point, I may not be able to control other behavior. as you just mentioned, the social media, for instance, will not enable me to keep an eye on my teenager day in, day out. So the best way of doing it is to ask that teenager. Another thing is, I need to ask the teenager, why do you want to do that? Why is it that you want to have this haircut? Why do you want to have this hair color, purple, for instance? Why is it that you're doing that? And when he answers the question why,
it's
we
a
can
fashion
actually,
thing, or it's
whatever it is, and why would that? How would that make you feel? Why are you actually dying to do it? And when you find the answers, you can find other ways of fulfilling his needs in different ways. Like, for instance, if I need to feel that I'm cool, for example, okay, you can be cool in different ways. All right, so let's choose other ways that can actually be abiding with or matching our value system, and at the same time makes you feel the way you want to feel about yourself.
Dr. Samah, when is the point, as we have been talking about mood swings, about maybe some period when the kid, especially the girls, could go into a phase of continuous crying or continuous need to go out or whatever. What is the point that the parent think that his kid need to seek a professional assistance?
When do I feel, or what are the indicators that my son or daughter need professional help? Okay, that would be like when that child goes through a prolonged phase of depression, for instance. If I see certain new signs about him, like, for example, if I know about my son being very kind-hearted and he's very understanding, very polite, and all of a sudden I see that he's aggressive.
So when I see major shifts.
Exactly. The shifts would actually be a strong indicator that there's something wrong, that this son or daughter, they're not actually going through this phase easily, and they need help. Depression is another thing. Any extraordinary or any significant kind of change in their manners or attitude, that would require me to first sit, talk, and if that does not help, then yes, we need to seek professional help, definitely.
What about sometimes the teenagers, they go through a prolonged time of sleeping? Why? And how should we face them?
Yeah, sleeping has two reasons. Either the physical, yes, the hormonal change actually needs some kind of sleep. And the other reason could be, again, it's a sort of depression. And the teenage would resort to sleep as a way of, escaping certain matters that he's facing out there in life. For example, if there are peer pressures, or if he is bullied by some of his friends at school, and he cannot actually manage that, and it's so stressful, then he finds resort in sleeping. So again, sleeping could be an indicator that this teenager is going through a hard time.
He's in need for professional
Exactly, and we would need to
and here, at this point, Dr. Samah, I need a life coach or I need a psychiatrist. Which kind of assistant I should seek as a parent? Or it depends?
It depends on, of course, the sleeping time. If it exceeds 12 hours, then definitely I would need to seek a professional doctor, a physician, to see if there's something wrong with the hormones or whatever. If not, if we exclude the physical factor, then we need to discuss the emotional factor, the depression, for example. And in this case, a life coach will be very helpful, because what we do is we identify the cause, and we help the teenager to get himself out by selecting certain options and alternatives.
What about the emotional needs of the teenagers?
He has lots of needs, and that's why I'm saying parents need to educate themselves as to what their teenagers need and how to fulfill these needs.
What about these needs, Dr.
For example, he needs to be loved unconditionally. Unconditionally, like, I love you whether you succeed in life or not, whether you passed the exam or you failed. So
I should not link both.
Imagine, yes. But parents, they fall into this trap of always linking the child to his achievements or attitude. Actually, we shouldn't do that.
And what about the comparison? Yes, if I compare him to his brother or sister or whatever.
Parents think that this is an incentive. Actually, it's a destructive element. It's a destructive tool altogether.
It's a very important point.
Exactly. We should deal with a teenager as an identity that is totally separated from anything else. That's one thing. Another thing, as I said, unconditional love, meaning that even if I see my son, for example, failing an exam, That does not mean that I stopped loving you. I'm not happy with what you did because you could have done better, but I accept you. I love you, the person. So that is very important. This would make him feel secure. The teenager needs to be heard. He needs to feel respected. He needs to feel that he has a margin of freedom. But again, there are certain boundaries, there are certain solid grounds. If you give him complete and utter freedom...
No utter freedom.
But there are, some parents would say, okay, let him go whatever he wants, let him do whatever she wants, and so on and so forth, thinking that this is the right way of doing it. This is not, because even though the teenager may appear happy because he got what he wanted, but deep, deep inside, he will feel so insecure because he doesn't know where to stop, what the limits are, where should I go. So the parent needs to establish some kind of value system, as I said, and the boundaries within which the freedom could be given.
What about the emotions for others, the emotions for his friends or her friends, and for the family members, and for others? Of course, during that period, we start to feel for another colleague or another person. So how do you see the emotions from these perspectives?
The more the teenager is in need of the more he will seek that kind of love in different relationships. So that is why it's very important that as a parent I give the kind of love and attention and time to my teenager, so that when he goes out in the world, he will not seek the attention of somebody else. So what usually happens is that parents don't even know how to deal with a teenager, so they leave them all together, and they rarely show them love, they rarely show them affection, because you know what, the teenager, they sometimes resist that. You know, like when you come and give him a hug, for instance, he'll feel that this is so childish and babyish, and he would be real. But deep inside, he actually needs it. But then again, he's like conflict
to show because he's old enough now.
Yeah. So when he doesn't have it of affection, he may seek that in extra relationships outside the family zone. And that, of course, is risky because you never know what happens then. But that, again, brings us back to the value system. If we have a clear value system, even if the teenager goes astray for a while, he will go back on the right track eventually.
Indeed. Dr. Samah Khamis, live course, thank you very much for your input and for being with us today.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition from Body and Soul. Hope you have enjoyed it, and we'll meet again. Mahisi Rabia signing off.